Good morning, everybody. Really fantastic to see the room full. I think it's a testimony to the interest that we have in 4 fantastic speakers. You can see their names on the screen. I'm not going to introduce them. I've had the opportunity to meet some of them last night. They're really at the cutting edge of innovation, technology, but also understanding the double-edged sword of technology, its control, its repression, but how it can also advance new thinking in the field that we're working on. The title, as you can see, Shielding Against Authoritarian Censorship, Resilience, Legitimacy, and Global Norms. So I'm really glad to see all 4 of you, and I know that they're experts in the audience as well, and I've already told the organizers, I will usurp the order of things and maybe just pounce on the participants to gather your thoughts as we speak. But let me start with one of the frontline actors who's really working on information control and looking at how core technology has been used and abused by various authoritarian actors. Nighat, let me turn to you. You know, you are at the front line of sort of digital rights foundation in your role in Pakistan as well. I'd like you to give the audience, in this age where we're seeing surveillance and censorship in various countries right across the world, I'd like to get your sense of, what does digital repression look like from where you sit, from where you work? You're one of the frontline practitioners. What does it look like for people who work with Digital Rights Foundation? And also understanding how domestic repression becomes a foreign project as well, from where you sit as well. Let's start with you to give us a broad overview so that we can understand why we're here this morning.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. And I'm really glad that we are starting this conversation while centering global majority, and also how practices and different initiatives in the North sort of, being imported, not in a true sense and spirit the way they are being shaped here. And the realities of marginalized communities that they face around censorship and surveillance. I think that the kind of excuses being used by different governments, whether they are authoritarians, but also it's interesting for me to see some of the same narratives are being used in the democratic societies as well now. They shape our online experiences, and it's not just like online experiences, those are our lived experiences. And in South Asia, because I'm from Pakistan, what we have seen that these narratives are not abstract. They are deeply political tools. Governments use, for instance, morality to silence women, security to suppress dissent, and national unity to erase diversity of thought. And what's particularly worrying is how these justifications are now embedded in laws and regulations through vague cybercrime regulations, data localization rules, which interestingly for me, I have been hearing in the North that these are data sovereignty and the conversation around sovereignty. And for me, I'm like, okay, how we are interpreting data sovereignty in our part of the world. So there are like different interpretations of these terms, and also online safety laws emerging everywhere in the UK and the North, and we already have these online safety laws in practice which criminalize expression. So at the Digital Rights Foundation, what we have seen through our digital security helpline that we have been running for the last 8-9 years, journalists, activists, and women, ordinary citizens, they are targeted online and offline often under these vague clauses of laws, and the laws that are being made in the name of protecting marginalized groups or high-risk individuals who are doing critical work. These laws are being actually used against them. There are several other things that we are working on, but one thing that I would like to end my note on, that yes, different technologies, tools, laws that are being worked and shaped in the North. I think it's very important for us, and I have been stressing on this point, that how we can contextualize these conversations, these tools, these designs. And I'm sure Laura will talk about this, because Open Tech Fund is one of the initiatives or fund that support people on ground who can actually make these tools according to their own contextual and local needs.
Yeah. I'm going to turn to Laura shortly, because I think one of the reasons why we put this panel in the way we did is that we wanted to put a spotlight on the practitioner, the researcher, the funder, both you and in terms of Laura's work. And I want to acknowledge Peter Wagner from FPI EU, who with Paris Peace Forum is funding, sponsoring this important session that I think is necessary now. And I also want to acknowledge your presence from Microsoft in the room. Kseniia, let me, because Nighat has spoken about what is happening at the domestic level, and I like the way you connected the global North, data sovereignty, and what is happening in some other parts of the world. I try not to use global North, global South, but the rest of the world. But Kseniia, you've been at the forefront yourself of domestic control. You've seen how it's become a pernicious actor, particularly from your home of origin, and you've seen how it's played out in Ukraine. And I wanted to ask you about the role it plays overseas. This is not just within the confines of a territorial boundary, but you've also seen what surveillance, how when it's exported overseas, the role it plays also in a very pernicious, manipulative and dangerous way. And I'd like you to sort of explain your own experience as well.
Thanks a lot. Indeed, what I do in my daily life as a researcher, I look at the materiality of surveillance and censorship in terms of how precisely the equipment, the hardware, the software that is running on those machines to survey and filter traffic, how it's built, what's inside the box. And with my colleagues from the Citizen Lab, also, we looked at the boxes that Russia is doing to survey on their own citizens. And we discovered, first of all, the foreign components in the heart of those surveillance machines, processors, graphic cards, network cards, memory, made by European or American, not just Chinese as we are used to see. And on the other hand, those machines are being sold and exported in the countries where Russia exerts and extends its control. One example is Afghanistan. This is something that you might maybe not expect, but a Russian vendor, VazExpert, that produces the surveillance boxes, has a very big market there. Iran is another example. We've done a research about Protei, which is a Russian technological company that sells DPI and surveillance equipment to Iran, has deals signed there. But the influence also goes beyond surveillance in terms of traffic, internet traffic. Russia controls almost all traffic that goes through Kazakhstan. Basically, Russia provides upstream internet traffic to Kazakhstan, and Kazakhstan relies on Russia on the content level. You know, if Russia decides to cut the cable, if Russia decides to filter more, to survey more, we are not sure that people living in the territory of independent republic, Kazakhstan, will not be victims of Russian digital influence. Kyrgyzstan, of course, as well, Belarus, Armenia, a country that is beautiful, but also geopolitically, geographically vulnerable, depending on a single point of traffic income. So Russia has its invisible net casted underwater, on the seas, but also landline cables. And this is something that we forget. Often we think of surveillance, we imagine, this black box, but those are also like the tentacles.
Can you explain a little bit more, because you've listed a range of countries which were nominally in the past under Russian sort of orbit, some would say control, colonial control. So, you've talked about, when I listened to what Nighat said about sort of domestic infrastructure, here's a domestic infrastructure grown in Russia, but is spreading its tentacles in a ad hoc manner. Can you explain the systematic control that you're seeing? For example, you mentioned Iran. Given what is happening in Iran now, it will be interesting to understand what that looks like today. Also, given the delicate dance that Russia is playing with the United States, what does that systematic control look like in Iran? Also, to understand what you meant by Afghanistan as well. Again, given the geopolitical changes, what does that look like?
So for Iran, of course, this is not my central point of interest, but actually it's a mutual relationship and inspiration, because Russia also is inspired by the NIN, which is the National Iranian Network. They have been building their sovereign internet for years, and in June this year, when the government started the longest and the most intense shutdown in Iran, they just activated the system that they have been building for years. And we don't know the exact part of Russian technology in there. There is one, we have the proof, but they have been also domestically building it, and Russia has been learning from that. So it's circulation of norms, circulations of forms of control, not just in one way.
Right. Mm-hmm. Nighat, are you seeing the same in terms of Pakistan's allies and what it's learning from other friends of the country, Russia being the other one? Are you seeing sort of partnership in terms of the infrastructure built in Russia, for example? Are you seeing that playing out, influencing, shaping developments between the government of Russia and Pakistan, and also what that means for the data sovereignty that you were talking about at home?
So I'm not specifically sure about Russia, but I would say like the region, the entire region itself. When we talk about South Asia, we have other powerful actors who are influencing our local in tech and internet infrastructure. For instance, China, and I think one stark difference, the conversations here around geopolitics and in our part of the world, is that there is lack of transparency of these collaborations and partnerships in our region, where actors like us, civil society, do not really get to know how these partnerships and collaborations are happening, and what kind of shape they are taking, what kind of information and structures are being shared and exchanged with each other. But it's happening silently, and I strongly feel that North is really not taking a notice.
So what do you mean by that? And the reason I ask is that there are a number of personalities here from the north who may want to have a view, and I'm going to ask for the mic to be given to you if you'd like to intervene as well. But what do you mean when you say the north is not under?
Over the years, I have seen in my work as a digital rights activist that a lot of human rights framework that we have built and centered around digital governance, we took that inspiration from EU or from US, or who actually did a lot of work, both all these jurisdictions around digital governance. But now what we are seeing is that they are departing from this narrative and human rights framework. So the conversation around AI and innovation and sovereignty is very restricted and narrow. And it seems like that everyone is kind of, like when they talk about internet, they are talking about their actual borders and not talking about, the other countries, how internet and technology impact, it's borderless. It impacts communities everywhere.
I'll come back to that point. Kseniia, I know you want to jump in. I want to bring in Laura after, because this is precisely what she's trying to address with her circumvention tools. But Kseniia, I see you're eager to respond. Go ahead.
Just a quick example that maybe Sandvine, maybe it rings a bell, a Canadian company. Very influential.
Say the name again.
Sandvine.
Sandvine. Mm-hmm.
Not as a wine that we enjoy here in Paris.
Yeah.
But
They have good wine in Canada as well, by the way.
Yeah, just an example, nothing more, of influential surveillance manufacturer that was exporting technologies in the countries completely dependent on supply from abroad, dependent on the north. And it was not the good technology that's been exported, unlike the one that, Laura, you do.
Okay, well, let's turn to the good guys in the form of Laura. Because that's how you've just been described by Kseniia. It's really great to have you on the panel. And a number of people may not know your fund, Laura, so it might be useful to at least give a little bit of insight into what you do. What do we mean by circumvention tools, and where have you seen them sort of play a useful, positive role, and how has it been specific in underwriting some of the work that people like Nighat is doing as well? Thank you.
Yeah, I can give a quick overview on the Open Technology Fund. So we work as a donor organization. We provide resources to support the research, development, implementation, and maintenance of internet freedom technologies. And for us, that means specifically circumvention tools that allow users to route around authoritarian censorship, and secure communication technologies that allow journalists and human rights defenders to do their work safely in contexts where there is repressive surveillance. So our goal really is to make sure that organizations around the world have the technologies that they need to do their work safely and to do their work well. And we have the incredible pleasure of working with my other panelists on these types of efforts. I think, where are these tools most effective and where are they available and the impact that they're having? I'm going to maybe flip that on its head a little bit and just say, I think oftentimes when I'm asked to talk about the tools that OTF supports, we're kind of defining the tools as the solution themselves. And one of the things that I really want to caution against there is that I think if we are looking exclusively at the technologies and kind of exclusively at the effectiveness of those tools, I really worry that we are missing kind of the forest for the trees. For me, the tools are the technologies are just a tool that enable human rights users, journalists, everyday citizens, like the examples that Kseniia and Nighat have given, to do their work. And I think the effectiveness there really is whether or not the technologies are enabling users to reassert the human rights that authoritarian governments are trying to prevent them from having. And so that's really the jumping off point in terms of how we think about it at OTF, is really centering the user, understanding what their challenges are, and trying to develop and support technologies that address that. And the last thing I would say there is just, I think that approach and looking beyond the technologies and centering the user is becoming more and more important as we see authoritarian regimes kind of evolving their approach to censorship. We don't see authoritarian regimes, now just simply trying to block VPNs or simply trying to block a secure communication tool. What we see instead is that they are trying to fundamentally redesign how their populations engage with the global internet, how they understand uncensored information. And so to kind of narrow our own focus onto just technological solutions, again, I think misses the broader point that we need to understand what the user challenges are, to center those, and then to be able to identify what types of solutions are best fit to purpose for those circumstances.
Let me ask you a question, maybe bring in Nighat here, because I know she's worked very closely with you. I mean, societies, and we've the title of this session talks about authoritarians, but Nighat, you made the important point that we're also seeing a democratic backsliding in so-called democratic countries. And there's circumvention and efforts to also undermine public freedom of expression in a number of societies that are not necessarily labeled officially authoritarian. But thinking about your tool, Laura, you are also facing a challenge in these societies that try to undermine the ability for you to fund into domestic NGOs. And there are lots of roadblocks, that stop NGOs or research entities from receiving money from foundations like yourself. So how do you work together to safeguard the space in which somebody like Nighat can do her work? And then Nighat, how then are you able to, guard against the surveillance and the repression that takes place in your space to ensure that you can work effectively under the goodwill of the support you get from Laura?
I'm glad that you asked this question because, yes, especially starting this year, what we are seeing is that the support to the communities on ground, organizations who are working in difficult contexts, the support has really decreased because of how the funding priorities have been changed by different governments. I think and I wouldn't talk about how we secure ourselves. It's difficult. It's very challenging. It's complex while you're working on ground, securing yourself, but also securing the communities that you are working with. But at the same time, I think one thing that I would like to say is Europe has a good opportunity at this point in time, where we are seeing other governments backtracking from their commitments to digital rights. Europe has an opportunity to be consistent around their human rights framework that they injected into the digital governance work for years. And now what we are seeing is that they are also focusing on other priorities. And I think this is where we really want Europe to step up and be consistent.
Sorry, let me put I'm going to speak on behalf of the EU, though they don't need me to speak on behalf of them. But what are the other priorities that they shouldn't be focusing on?
I just don't want Europe to become part of this AI bubble that is, going on around the world. And it's not just the race among companies, it's actually a race among governments as well.
Laura, you're nodding your head profusely. I'm going to ask you to come in. And then Censorship just did a prayer agreeing with you. So I'm going to ask you both. And then I'm going to put a question to the audience. I'll come back to them. But Laura, you were nodding in total agreement, and Censorship, you were praying. So let's go.
2 points on that. I'm nodding in total agreement with Nighat about the AI bubble. I think we often see donors and governments kind of chasing whatever is the latest, flashiest kind of technology intervention. And again, I think that misses the real challenge just to look at whatever kind of is the latest, flashiest thing to invest in. So completely agree with Nighat on that.
In a nutshell, Laura, what is the core challenge as you see it? Imagine that you've got a competing priorities. Put your position in the member states or the philanthropist or the big companies. What is, in a nutshell, the challenge as you see it?
So I think the biggest issue is that often we are trying to define the challenge by the solution.
Okay.
I think we are selecting technologies and then trying to apply them to the challenges that we see. We're saying AI is here and that's great, and therefore that's going to solve our problems. Okay. As opposed to, I think what I was trying to reiterate earlier, we need to focus on the users. We need to focus on the beneficiaries and their needs and center that and design for that, as opposed to selecting solutions and trying to export them in places where we think that they are needed.
Good. Censorship, and then I want to turn to the audience and come to Marija because she has the challenge to answer in the context of the EU. Please.
Sure. Very brief. I represent also a software project that's called Delta Chat. We've been funded by OTF for many years. We are a secure messenger that is used in the countries like Iran. It worked during shutdowns. People could communicate end-to-end encrypted in a decentralized way. The thing that when the funding programs from the US stopped, we continued our work. Why? Because first, we love what we do, we care about users, but also it's an open source project, and that's the key. There is a community of developers and experts who works on that, and it's based on open standards. It means that everyone can fork, replicate, and make this project live. And there is also a response, which is not totally economic, but it's also an organizational mode of work that I think can help us build this shield, and keep it. Because open source, you think about it, well, it's transparent, it's not very secure. It feels like if I open everything that I'm making myself vulnerable. But actually, it's the opposite.
Good. Let me ask the audience to help me with a poll, because I want to turn to Marita now and ask about the EU. The EU, imagine you're all EU officials working for Peter Wagner here in the front, and he's tasked you all to help him think about the fact that he has to spend 10 million euros. That is not a small amount of money. That is a big deal. And he has competing priorities that Nighat is trying to unravel because she feels that it should be providing the end users, people like you who are having to face human rights challenges. There's one community of actors that we haven't spoken about who traditionally do this kind of work of gathering information and making sure that we fact check and verify. These are independent journalists or independent communicators. And then we've got human rights actors, and then we've got the challenge of litigation as well, and trying to deal with global norms and resetting as well. Where would you deploy that money? Who would deploy the money towards independent journalists, or towards litigation, or towards building some kind of multilateral firewall that will respond to the global norms challenge that we have? The gentleman at the back, you've got your hand up, please. 10 million euros.
Good morning. I don't think it's 10 million.
Oh, okay. You have more? Well, this is what's in Peter's pocket.
I'm a bit concerned of hearing that technology is not playing a role in the authoritarian playbook. I think we have to wake up and realize that that's not the case. It's not the technology. But on the question of what the EU should do, I think we should be having a complete conceptual shift on public interest information. In 2020, right now, the EU is working on 2028 multi-annual financial framework, which is 2.0 trillion. I think if we start thinking of public interest information and putting aside journalism, which I represent in media, but public interest information now being represented by a young generation who don't have a press card and say, we need to have it working. Imagine water, imagine roads that are being deployed in those 2 trillion. Why don't we have this seminal shift in understanding that we need this, like water, roads, and so forth? First point. Second, let's look at the roads. And I mean, it is possible. I think we are actually having a serious conversation with 2 high-level DGs to be able to inscribe this into that law for those 2.3 trillion. Lastly, I totally agree. It'll be the last place in the world where public interest information, unbiased, China's not going to do it, India's not going to do it, other countries will not do it, and I don't think the US will do it. So you're absolutely right. It'll be the last place where public interest information is an essential democratic infrastructure. There's more than 10 million.
Okay, Peter, he needs more than 10 million. Can you say who you are so that we can know? I'm
Patrice Schneider. I work for the Media Development Investment Fund. We are a combination of a human rights organization and an investment fund.
Good. You're right at the intersection of the conversation that we're having. I don't know if there's anybody else who wants to rise to the bait that I provided. Otherwise, I'm going to turn to Marika. Marika, we have a challenge because Nighat at several times has raised the question about what the EU could do more effectively. And there is a question about the choices that the EU makes. There's the issue about its legitimacy in this role, in this forum. And I wanted to get your sense in terms of, imagine if you were now speaking to various EU officials about where they should put their support, what they should focus on, and how they, as sort of sitting between the US and China, how they can play a sort of more forward-leaning role to address the challenges that Kseniia and Nighat has raised as well, and also our colleague at the back has raised as well.
Thank you. I'll try. But I feel like we need to first address a little bit more clearly the political backdrop against which all of the wonderful previous interventions spoke about the impact in different contexts. And that is, of course, that the United States is actively stepping away from being pro-democracy, pro-universal human rights, pro-rules-based order. And that actually Americans now need to learn the lessons of how to safely communicate, etc. And a lot of this repression is happening in the name of free speech, which makes it very confusing, and is happening with support of the big tech companies that are used globally but that are American. So people, may have said things online and therefore will not be allowed a visa to enter the United States. Students who write critical op-eds on the genocide in Gaza are picked off the street, targeted with the help of US tech companies that are cheering on this presidency. And the loss of the United States as at least a declared supporter of democracy and human rights. We can have endless discussions about how perfect it ever was, and I think we all know there was a lot of nuance. But to not even want to stand for those values anymore, and to erode it so rapidly and aggressively domestically with huge ripple effects around the world, funding for civil society, political support for these values, erosion of academic freedom, self-censorship all around the United States, and also, I think, impacting Europe in how it positions itself vis-a-vis the United States. We are meeting at a very dark moment in time. And so I agree that there's a huge task on the shoulders of Europeans. And what I think is needed is more political appreciation of this new reality, less nostalgia for scraps of what the transatlantic relation once was, and a stepping up of the EU to actually be a stronger torchbearer of these universal human rights, democratic principles, rule of law-based interventions. Because the US is attacking Europe as well on the way it's regulating tech companies, on its alleged censorship, which is now a sort of, broad phrase to attack Europe from, perhaps some legitimate issues to broadly sweeping political attacks.
But what exactly should Europe
Yes.
do? I think everybody agrees that this is a wake-up call time for Europe. It's not a new fact. America's been talking about burden shifting for a long time. It didn't just happen this year. So, but what does it mean for Europe exactly, and how do you respond to Nighat's challenge that Europe too needs to step out from this embrace of the AI bubble and really start thinking about guardrails, resilience, and the norms as well?
Well, but I'm trying to challenge the notion that everybody has had the wake-up call. I wish they had, but I think they haven't. So what I'm encouraging Europeans to do is to get real about what is happening in the United States. And in fact, Americans are telling Europeans, you are our last hope. Regulate these tech companies, protect democracy, stand up. So, we really need to see more political leadership, more spending, more principled engagement with partners around the world. So that means building new democratic coalitions to build a stronger and more coordinated counter weight to this, on the one hand, very privatized power, on the one hand, very aggressive political power. And to indeed, answering Nighat's question, be much more aware of how also European laws that have democratic legitimacy, that are the product of a legitimate checks and balance designed governance process, can be taken out of context and can be abused, instrumentalized to repress. And so what I think, sorry, just to finish this one thing, we have to get some kind of shared clarity on when freedom of expression, allegations of censorship are invoked in a legitimate way and when they're instrumentalized. Because otherwise the discussion about where free speech is actually protected and where it's not gets very convoluted, and it's not helping the causes that I think everybody here shares.
And I think you were pointing out to some of the internal contradictions that are going on in Europe. I'm going to bring you in, sir, because I can see that you or should I leave it? Great. Kseniia, you wanted to respond.
Yeah, I second you on every word you said, and I wanted to add something because the topic of this edition is New Coalitions for Peace, and I just had a meeting, very interesting one, with Germans, French, and Canadians. Canadians are looking so much
civil society,
researchers, but involved in geopolitical issues of the internet, so infrastructures, and practitioners of people who build technologies that maintain internet. And we found out, thanks to a very prominent, promising PhD scholar who spent several months in the Canadian Arctic, She did tests with a weird box that she built. What is the source of the satellite internet in Canadian Arctic? Guess, United States, of course. And they were shocked, the government of Canada, when they found out the results of this research, that the whole region, which is very rich, depends entirely, or almost like 90% on American traffic. And now they're looking at Europe. And the Canadians also look at Europe with this hope. Like, please, let's do it together.
Well, but the dependencies that Europeans have, and this is where I think the wake-up call is theoretically happening, but not leading to enough actions, is that the incredible dependence that we all have on US technologies can be weaponized, is leading to different behavior, less courage, less principled positions by Europeans because they are afraid of what can happen through the power that the executive has in the United States over companies. So I'm not just talking about the CEOs that are supporting this president with the inauguration, the ballroom, the policies, the cryptocurrencies, and what have you. But I'm also talking about the mere fact that the executive in the United States has enormous power through sanctions, through this dependency worldwide.
Server infrastructure also, data centers.
Yes, and so to add to what you said, Kseniia, I think the other thing that Europeans need to double down on is building alternatives and not just regulating existing services, because that will not be enough of a game changer for having real alternatives.
Let me bring in Laura, but keep the mic, Marita, because you're talking about investments as well, and really putting money behind and backing good ideas that are sort of within Europe as well. Laura, do you have a response to what Marita was saying? Because on the one hand, Marita, you're acknowledging sort of the political reality that confronts Europe with all its own internal contradictions. Some of the European countries themselves are undermining freedom of speech as well. So, but Laura, I wanted to get your reaction to what Marita was saying as well.
I completely agree that it is time for a wake-up call, and I think, frankly, it's long overdue. I think this has, just as you said, it's driven home the dependencies and the single point of failure that I think has existed, at least from kind of an internet freedom perspective, for a very long time. But I think I think an important takeaway here for us is that, digital authoritarian technology is borderless. Digital authoritarianism is not a single threat. It's not confined by state boundaries. It is a challenge that needs to be addressed in a much, much broader way. And I'm not sure this wake-up call is the way that I would necessarily like to do that, but I do think it is an important point to get other countries invested in understanding what is truly a global threat and a global challenge, and needs a more unified and diversified approach. Mm-hmm. So I think it is a wake-up call. I just think it's taken far too long.
Yeah. Nighat, you're at the front line of everything that Marita is saying. She tried. She gave us a very strong geopolitical sort of wake-up call that what Europe needs to do, rethink and rebuild. What does that mean for you at the front line in terms of trying to build a right-based internet, in terms of get a more open-sourced information flow, in terms of how to deal with the pernicious side of data, and how it's used or misused by states, by the way. I mean, we've been focusing on states, but there's also non-state actors who are very sophisticated in how they also create their own firewalls that also undermine states as well. But I wanted to get your response to that.
Yeah, we have been raising alarm on how good intended regulations and laws can be taken out of context in many parts of the world. It's nothing new. It's not that it's happening now. It has been happening for a very long time. I think where we really need to focus is, and why we are asking for this wake-up call, and it's the consistency of Europe to be the torchbearer of human rights framework. But also, we are talking about the resilience of communities. There is no doubt that authoritarian regimes won't, like weaponize such kind of laws and regulations. But what can help us is the resilience of the people on ground who can fight back. If we are looking for centered human rights technologies and norms internationally, we really need to keep supporting the people who are fighting the real fight on ground. And they are burnt out, they are exhausted, and I think that's where really Europe needs to look into.
Can I just see if there's anybody in the audience? I heard a number of people clapping on, and so I thought you may have something that you want to add or observations that you want to make. It's my good friend at the back there, Jude. Please, at the back there, stand up, and then we'll take you after as well. And did I see somebody in the corner there? Okay, please, go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Jude Udoilo. I work for the Hague Institute for Innovation of Law. Fascinating conversation. 2 points. One is the pivots or the implosion of the United States leadership has also created a lot of incentive for other autocrats to behave irresponsibly because the guardrails globally kind of off. And I think part of what the EU should do is to start building that solidarity network, especially with Africa, because it is important to incentivize good behavior by leaders in Africa, but also support organizations who are trying to hold government accountable and help create the space for digital democracy. And I think it is really, really important that as we try to build this new set of guardrails and these new coalitions, we begin to look to those places who before may not really play a frontline role in guardrail building. So I think it's really, really important that Europe looks to Africa.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, I'll stop there.
Next question, please. Thank you. And then I'll take one more, and then I'm going to give you all 30 seconds to respond. Please go ahead. And I'll take the one at the corner there as well. Thank you.
Yeah,
Please say
Evelyn
who you are
Korn,
as well.
European University for Peace, Justice and Inclusive Societies. And I thank you so much to all of you for these statements. And I would like to connect to you. It's a competition between governments and not between firms. And I would like to include the regulation of research and teaching, in particular in the higher education sector. We focus a lot on innovative technologies from a research perspective, and in particularly in the EU, we're separating research from education. That is dangerous, I think, because if we think about the next generation leaders, they need to have values and beliefs that have these individual freedoms, the right to be forgotten, all these things in mind, and are not only framed by technological leaders. And we're giving the rules for our education to the firms because we are dependent on their technologies, and it's US-centered technology. So I would like to hear your stance on what's the role of education.
Thank you. I'll take one more question at the back there. Thank you. Please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, Bennett Freeman, Chatham House, former State Department. I just really want to commend and reinforce Bariacha's point that was widely shared about the urgency of the EU taking a very strong stand here in opposition to the US. And I'm sorry to have to say that. But look, we go back and forth in the international community as to who sets the rules and the standards. The US has abdicated that role for the next few years, if not the foreseeable future. And the whole world, the global majority countries, the US, Europe, the whole world will pay a terrible price if we cede power and authority to the convergence of the Trump administration and to the big tech powers who are now unchecked with AI accelerating at a speed way beyond anybody imagined. So Europe has got to take a stand in its interests and in the interests of the international community.
Thank you so much. 30 seconds, literally, to all of you. Thank you.
Yeah, so I couldn't agree more. We have everything to lose. That is the foundation of our freedoms, our human rights, our quality of life, and the future of our children. And what I'm missing is more of a fighting spirit.
I completely agree. I appreciate the emphasis on the wake-up call and also the push for a real fighting spirit. The one thing I would add to that is that, focus on the users, focus on the challenges, don't get caught up just in the technologies.
And our users and challenges, Nighat, I'm going to start with you and then end with you, Kseniia. Please, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say that the communities on ground are your real power.
Yeah.
So invest in their resiliency.
That
It's
is-
not only about tools.
That is such a perfect line. It's real. Your people on the ground are where the power lies. Thank you for saying that. Please, Kseniia.
I would respond to this call to work together with Africa. I think this is really important. We have several projects where we learn from communities in African countries, for example, Nigeria, where we actually learn from them how they exist in such a crazy context, very hard, and survive and build communities on the ground and work together. We need to learn from you a lot.
I mean, this is the heart of resilience, working directly with communities on the ground, the frontliners, who are also at the face of the surveillance repression as well. Thank you so much for such a rich, diverse conversation, and to all of you for taking part in the conversation. Thank you so much.